Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Uriel Gonzales, Hermanos Gonzales Static Cherry Natural Processed Panama from Luminous Coffee. And there's the box right there. And Luminous, based out of Henderson, Nevada. And they were a suggestion to us by Basilberry and Connor. So shout out to and thank you to Basilberry and Connor for the suggestion. Now, since this is their first ever appearance on this channel, let's go ahead and take you through their very unique packaging, as yes, this is in fact a takeout container. And it looks like they put a lot of work into the takeout container itself. On the front, we have the information for the coffee, and then on the back, we have their brew recipe. But there's still so much more to it as you open the contents of the box, and they do print your name on the bag itself. And then they also provide a fortune cookie, which we'll be opening at the end to see what it says inside of that. They also include some stickers and then a water mineral packet to ensure that you have the right mineral content with your water. So they really put a lot of effort into it. I really like it. I think the packaging is a lot of fun. So this is going to make for a fun review. I'm actually very much looking forward to discussing it. This right here is day 32. And the recipe they have for their coffee, let's go ahead and pull it up right here. It says a 19 gram coffee to 270 gram water. I believe the content came out to a little under 15:1 water to coffee ratio. They say 205 degrees Fahrenheit, and this is for a V60. However, this coffee, as you can probably tell by the processing method, was a little bit more on the heavy side, so I wanted to tone this one down. We went with a 199 degree Fahrenheit at a 17:1 water to coffee ratio. I like this one best to the V60 as well, so definitely a little bit more of a diluted recipe. Roast profile for this coffee, it's an experimental processing method. I'm not sure I have a great descriptor for how the development was on this coffee. It just felt a little bit more developed, likely due to the heaviness of the coffee itself. So I'm not going to try to identify roast profile for this one. It just felt a little on the heavier side in general. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 16, first impression, and the cup immediately had a aroma that was reminiscent of the fermenty aspect of natural Colombian coffees, and it's pretty well documented at this point that probably my least favorite coffees in general are those natural processed Colombian coffees, because they do come out just much more heavy. It was moderately clean within the cup itself, but there was definitely a dominant boozy chocolate component to the cup. Some subtle citric components in the background, but it left this okay first impression. I didn't necessarily like the heaviness that was coming from the aroma of the beans itself. I think that was a pretty strong indicator that this coffee was going to be a little bit more heavy than I was looking for. Day 18 ran through the V60 and it was slightly better, as the heavy aroma is still present in the brew, but it is not as deep in the cup itself, as there was still much more of that heavier chocolate aspect reminiscent of what I described as a porter coffee beer. So we had that really weird review from Brandywine earlier this year, which was that stout processed coffee, and it honestly reminded me of that, with a slightly tropical component to the cup as well, ever so slight, as it was really kind of buried underneath the heaviness from this coffee. Not necessarily the best today, but an improvement. Day 20 adjusted to Luminous's recipe, and I never for one second thought that it was going to be ideal to adjust to the recipe, because I feel like they were really trying to push the vibrancy and strong characteristics of this coffee, and given that it was already a little too heavy for me to start with, a more concentrated recipe wasn't ideally the direction I wanted to go. But I did want to at least try their recipe, and it came out as a very robust dark chocolate with much more of the fermentiness, a very sharp brightness, this very strong, sharp, bright acidity, and even the slight olive-like quality that I've described from a lot of these more experimental processed coffees, most specifically a lot of the natural processed Colombian coffees, especially the anaerobic natural Colombian coffees. Didn't like this one, definitely not skewing in the right direction. We continue on to day 22 as we ran it back through the Chemex, and it continues to trend in the heavy direction. And this is definitely going to be a theme to the cup, as that alongside of the really bright aspects kind of created this heavy fermenty cup with a very strong acidity to it, which are two things I don't particularly love in coffee. Very much skewing on this strong citrus as well as the chocolate, so not a good day on this one as well for me. Day 24, a V60 day, and it did come out slightly better, as there was a little bit more depth as you let the cup cool down all the way to room temperature, and that's the best I was able to get from this coffee. Was once you let so much of that heaviness die down with a cool down, you're able to pull out a slight bit more from it as the chocolate becomes slightly more defined, but it still remains really heavy on the zesty citric acidity. So still two things I'm not necessarily loving from this cup. Day 26, lowered the temperatures, increased the ratio, and it was a much better cup as there was a little bit more clarity than we'd experienced. The coffee was definitely going a little bit more in that direction of heaviness because on the earlier days it wasn't there, but you kind of felt that it was trending in that direction, and that's definitely what you experienced as there was a little bit more of the listed fruit aspect. So they do have a melon flavor note listed on here and a mango flavor note listed on here. They're subtle, they're in the background, they're definitely nowhere near as pronounced as the really strong, vibrant, heavy chocolate aspects. Slight bit of sugary and stone fruits, but it's still really dominated by that robust chocolate aspect. Day 28, more struggles with the cups as the adjustments really didn't seem to do it good on this day either. Maintaining those same things, lower temperatures and a lower concentration, so a much more diluted cup of coffee. I feel like since the coffee was just getting stronger with more rest, it wasn't necessarily helping out the direction that the coffee was going, as there was a little bit more of that savory olive-like aspect yet again to complement a strong citric acidity as well as a heavy chocolate attribute. So really not liking this coffee at this moment. It's just a little bit more in the direction that I don't like. Day 30, kept the temperatures lower again, ran it through the V60, and while it remains super bright and heavy, there is still so much of the dominant heavy chocolate aspect and that kind of olive-like taste for me again. So a little bit of a struggle. Adjustments weren't necessarily yielding positive results. I really had a hard time adjusting this coffee. I don't necessarily know what I could have done, especially given that going with the suggested ideas, it was also still very much a struggle. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. All right, and 3 level 5, so let's go through those real quick. The finish level 5, that's not too surprising. This one has a very long lasting finish. It's a very heavy finish. It's a very heavy cup of coffee, so I don't think that that's surprising in the slightest bit. It just, as I took that sip, I'm going to be tasting that sip for quite a while. Very, very heavy chocolate to it. And it does have that very strong savory aspect, that kind of olive-like taste to it. So not necessarily loving that. The acidity, the cup's really bright. Like it has a really sharp, bright acidity, which I wasn't necessarily expecting. I could have expected the heaviness, especially from the way the beans themselves smell and the aroma and the grounds and everything like that. But the very sharp, bright acidity within this coffee is kind of unexpected, but very strong in it. So it definitely justifies that level 5. Chocolate level 5, that right there is by far the most highlighted flavor profile to this coffee. It is intense, very strong, very heavy, very much in the dark chocolate direction, not something I particularly like. And then a couple level 4s, so the body level 4, even with the diluted concentration, it's still kind of hit very high on the body. It's a very heavy bodied cup of coffee. Citrus fruit level 4, I've been touching on the citrus as being one of the more pronounced aspects to this cup. I think that's in line with the acidity, which is also very strong. So those two come out in very complementary and strong abundance in this cup. Just definitely feel like that's there. A lot of extras in this cup. There's a fair bit of spice. It has a kind of interesting like spice to complement that chocolate, a slight bit of saltiness. The berry, I'm kind of lining with the fermentiness that's in this coffee. A heavy bit of smokiness, a fair bit of bitterness from the dark chocolate aspect. But so you can see there are a lot of things, but obviously the most important one we probably should discuss is the cleanliness at a level 1. This coffee was so fermenty and so heavy that I couldn't justify anything other than level 1. Even on the earlier days before it really started to take off, maybe a level 2 at some points could have been justified in this one. But this one right here, just it's too heavy to really reach above that level 1 mark. So I really like the way that this tasting wheel looks, especially drinking it now. I can see why everything is exactly where it is. I feel like these are very defined marks as to where this coffee should be in terms of that tasting wheel. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. Let me start with this. We have a second Luminous review coming up, and I definitely liked that coffee a lot more than this one. So I don't want to say anything negative about Luminous. This one was just not my coffee. So I oftentimes say that I really look for level 4 sweetness to begin with. And it's a little upsetting that for a coffee this dominant, vibrant, heavy, it didn't at least hit the level 4 sweetness mark. And then obviously cleanliness is a huge importance to me. So I really like my cleanliness also to be a minimum level 4. So level 1 is a really tough selling point to me. It's basically a roundabout way of saying this one just isn't my coffee, which is fine. I've had a lot of coffees that were like this, and it doesn't necessarily reflect on the roaster because I keep saying that the next review we have coming up from Luminous will be a much better review. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, anybody that does like the really heavy fermenty coffees, especially skewing more on the dark chocolate side of things. This one had it in very strong abundance. If you really like the vibrancy that comes with these coffees, as well as the acidity, that's kind of the best direction I can point someone towards in terms of this coffee. But yeah, I've been eyeing this fortune cookie. Let's go ahead and crack into it before we end this review. All right. And it says, put some old business behind you today. All right, if you guys are enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. But this right here has been a review of the Uriel Gonzales, Hermanos Gonzales Static Cherry Natural Processed Panama from Luminous Coffee. Thank you for watching.